It's such a pleasure to talk to you today, and I can't wait for all of my listeners to hear about your experience, your wisdom, and any um, just inspiration you can give to them, because you are one of the most inspiring people I know. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for the kind words, especially coming from you, Colleen. And I gotta tell you, there is a lot of good news. There's a lot of positive progress. So today is a good day to talk to you, no doubt about it.
I love that. And we will always talk about hope, and we will always end on hope, because there is a lot to be hopeful about. And this is what it looks like. So before we get into the specifics about really, why we're here today, I would love if you could talk about, what do you do? What does it mean to be the vice president of farmed animal protection at the Humane Society of the United States? What is your day-to-day job?
Well, how I look at it is this: I want to reduce as much animal suffering as possible. And that's what I hope to do during my lifetime. And the way we are looking at it is that we have a very stringent code on how to do it. And that is, you look at where are the most animals raised within factory farms, where's the most suffering, and also what's tractable, where can we win? And so that's where areas of focus are. So what does that look like in day to day? Well, our three components are: one, passing laws like Proposition 12 in California, which I know we'll be talking about. We wage corporate campaigns to get major corporations like McDonald's to stop using eggs from chickens confined in tiny cages. And we have a division that works with the food service industry, like Compass Group, Aramark, Sodexo, to offer more plant-based meals and reduce the amount of meat that they offer. So if we can reduce the demand for farm animals while ensuring the animals who are raised for food have a better life, hey, I think that is a life worth living, and that's what our areas of focus are.
Right on. And so you, Josh Balk, you travel a lot. You are really in the trenches. What does your day look like? It's managing, imagine, a lot of the team members. You're in DC right now on the ground. So, I mean, what does your day-to-day look like? Does it change from day to day? You're managing all of those different departments?
I do lead all of those departments. Fortunately, I have an amazing team who does most of the work. I travel and focus on different areas in a given moment. So let's say Proposition 12 in California, our wonderful state. I actually moved to California to lead the campaign. So day to day, I was leading that Proposition 12 campaign and spent most of my time working on that historic ballot measure across the state. What I would do during that ballot measure is I'd go up and down the state debating agribusiness. What I would do is meet with editorial boards of newspapers to come to our position and endorse the legislation. I would raise funds so we could air our commercials to spread the word. It is a whole host of activities, as if we were running a gubernatorial campaign or presidential campaign. But the candidate isn't me, Colleen. The candidate was the animals. And so that's what I did day to day during that campaign. Since then, I would go to different states working on pieces of legislation in those states that mirrored Proposition 12. I would meet with corporations at their headquarters to negotiate changes in their animal welfare policies. On the food service side with plant-based, hey, most of the time that's our amazing chefs and professionals working with those food service providers to shift their menus. At this moment, I'm in DC. You're right, I'm in DC because that's where the Supreme Court hearing just took place. So I was standing outside the courthouse doing media before and after the hearing. And so much of my life and the life of so many of my colleagues was wrapped up in this big historic Proposition 12 Supreme Court case.
Yeah, so let's talk about it, because we're obviously skirting around it. So Proposition 12 was a ballot measure that was put on the ballot in 2018, and voters in California, 2/3 of California voters, supported this measure, which Prop 12 was the proposition number, but obviously this was the protection for farmed animals. Was that the right name?
Yes.
Prevention of cruelty,
Farm Animal Prevention, Prevention of Farm Animal Cruelty Act.
Right.
And yes, and you're exactly right. It was called Prop 12 because there's a bunch of other initiatives. Those of us in the state know there's usually a bunch of initiatives when we have a chance to vote. So you're right. It was on the ballot in 2018.
And just, I mean, I don't want to do schoolhouse rock right now. I'm really hoping most people know how a bill becomes a law, but this is different than your typical way of a bill becoming a law, or this is a different way of a law becoming a law. So I would love to talk about why we in California, and there are a couple dozen other states that also have propositions, ballot measures, why was there a ballot measure to prevent cruelty to farm animals in the first place? Why go this route as opposed to, I mean, you could give a Schoolhouse Rock, I'm sure, summary of how a bill normally becomes a law, but why go this route, right? Why aren't there laws? Why aren't the people we elect as our elected officials, why aren't they passing laws to protect farm animals? Why did you go this route? And when I say you as the Humane Society of the United States was the sponsor of this ballot measure.
You're right. We did lead it, and that's a great question. You're right. Several dozen states allow a ballot measure process. And for those listeners who aren't in one of those states, you might be wondering, what is a ballot measure? I don't even know what they are. What it is that for those states that allow it, if you collect the requisite number of signatures, which is usually some high percentage of the number of votes in the previous election, you can put a question on the ballot. So when people vote for governor or congressperson or city council member, your question is on the ballot. So in California, we did that. We collected hundreds of thousands of signatures, about 500,000 signatures we collected in order to get on the ballot. Now, to your question, why did we have to do that? Why don't we just go to the state legislature and say, please pass a bill to help farm animals? Well, the reason being is that typically farm animal legislation goes to the ag committees in states. And typically those ag committees are not so friendly towards farm animals. They're usually supported by the big factory farm interest groups. And so we often don't even get a hearing if we try to push anything forward for farm animals, let alone a positive vote. So rather than just going down the same experience over and over again of not even getting a vote, let alone winning, we just went right to the people. And here's the thing, Colleen, is that ordinary Americans support animals. They do. Most people care about animals in their own ways. You know, they might not be vegan like you and me, but at their heart, they don't want to see animals suffering. So we knew going into it, when given a chance, ordinary citizens would vote in favor of animals over the industrial factory farms that were opposing us.
Yeah, we see that all the time, right? We see that in surveys. We see it in ballot initiatives like this. We see it. We know people care, and we know there's a disconnect between the compassion we have and the behavior that we participate in. And a lot of that behavior is status quo, it's conditioned, it's ingrained, et cetera, et cetera. That's a whole other conversation. But I know that a lot of people might feel that there's a real disconnect, and that how do you reconcile saying that you care about animals and then eating them and supporting the most egregious types of animal cruelty? Yes, it's true. That's what willful blindness is, and it's a powerful thing. And the industries, what I find is very interesting, the industries actually tap into our compassion by telling us things we want to hear so that we believe that we're doing the right thing and that we're not causing harm. So these industries are they're really kind of tapped into what is really our compassion. And yet we know what is really happening. That's why they don't want us to see it. And what you're doing and what this initiative did was say, listen, let's just look at the most egregious types of animal cruelty within the industries themselves. And we're talking about the egg industries, the pork industry and pork industry, and the veal industry, right? And let's just say, like, basic minimum requirements for a being who has a body and basic needs. Let's just do away with the most egregious types of cruelties. So talk about what the specifics were, what this ballot initiative, what this measure asked.
Well said. As your listeners know, most egg-laying hens are confined in tiny cages about the size of our home microwaves. They can't even spread their wings. Most mama pigs are confined in cages so narrow they never can even turn around. Most baby veal calves are confined in crates where they can't even turn around either. And so what we did is say, listen, hey, I would love utopia. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all farm animals lived in sanctuaries where they would just be treated with love and compassion? Of course. But let's, at minimum, create standards where they're not perpetually tortured in tiny cages. So what Proposition 12 did is ensure that all eggs, pork, and veal produced and sold, by the way, sold in California, cannot come from farm animals confined in tiny cages. And you might be wondering, well, this seems common sense. Like, of course, everybody would vote for it. And what's the problem? Well, I gotta tell you, that makes it the strongest law in the world. There is no other law in the world that is as strong as Proposition 12. Listen, I hope there is. I hope laws get stronger in all the other parts of the world. But certainly at the time, it was the strongest law in the world. And if one ever thinks, okay, well, industry must have just said, okay, these are just minimum standards, we'll stand back. It's the opposite. They fought as hard as they could, and they've been fighting ever since. Once we won and got nearly 2/3 of the vote. So what is fascinating about agribusiness is that it is so bad that when you create minimum standards, it actually massively reduces the suffering of millions of animals. So that was the success of Proposition 12. And you know what? Since Election Day, we actually took that law and passed similar laws in Oregon, Washington, Michigan, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. So this has been spreading all across the country. You know, Colleen, when you and I met many years ago, about 2% of the egg industry was free from cages. Most eggs came from chickens confined in cages. Now, because of these laws and also the corporate campaigning, more than 1/3 of egg-laying hens in this country are cage-free. And according to the USDA, 75% will be cage-free by 2025. Like, we're looking like a progressive EU nation when it comes to egg-laying hens, but it didn't happen by chance. It happened by choice. The choice to wage these aggressive campaigns and the fact that we are victorious.
So then the states that you mentioned, were those all ballot measures?
A lot of them, if not virtually all of them, was because they did not want a ballot measure to come to their state. They saw what happened in California. They're like, oh my gosh, people really will vote for this. Hey, let's just move forward. And we negotiated. And what basically we said in all these states was, listen, okay, you want a little bit more time to comply, we'll give you another year or two, but you have to support our legislation then. And so rather than waging a ballot measure and maybe winning one state every 2 years, we passed laws in many states over 2 years. It was the fastest stretch of victories for farm animals legislatively in our nation's history, because the egg industry in particular recognizes the future is cage-free and was like, listen, we'll move away from cages. Just give us another year to comply. We're going to go faster than you otherwise could. And we said, let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, California really leads the way in so many ways. I mean, you were so smart. You started it in California. That was the first one. It was California. Was that
California starting was the strongest law. We passed a ban on gestation crates and a ballot measure in Florida in 2002.
Right.
Then a ban on gestation crates and veal crates in Arizona 2006. Then Proposition 2, I know you remember that, Colleen, back in 2008, the precursor of Proposition 12, went to Massachusetts for a ballot measure. Then 2018 came back to California. So the good news about that is that I know that sometimes in this partisan world, everything is so partisan. No matter what you say, it's left versus right, Republican versus Democrat. We pass these initiatives in red states, purple states, blue states. When it comes to compassion for animals, there should not be a litmus test on who is part of the team. Hey, if you're about animals, if you want animals to have a better life, you're on the team. And we found that with voters in all states that we worked in across the country, no matter what color those states were.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, compassion it spans all, it transcends and spans all political parties and religions and philosophical perspectives, whatever it is. It's in all of us, and I think we can see that. I mean, we can see that. It is so interesting because I know that all of us who've been part of contributing to violence against animals by eating animals and their secretions. We all want to believe that there are checks and balances in place, that we're not contributing to animal cruelty. We all tell ourselves these things. The industries tell ourselves these things. Our families tell ourselves these things because, again, we want to believe we're good people. So we believe that there's laws in place. And of course, someone would say, well, how would we even need a law like this? Why would we even need this? What about the Humane Slaughter Act? And what about the So, I mean, talk about that a little bit, because I think people really want to believe that everything's already in place to make sure animals are not being tortured, both in the raising and in the transporting and in the killing. And of course, that's not necessarily true.
You're right. It is not necessarily true. And it's unfortunately the opposite. Typically, things are in place so there is not any improvement for farm animals. Any improvement that I have ever seen when it comes to farm animals is because of campaigning for change. Entrenched interest fight change. They prefer a status quo. And animal agribusiness, they have a lot going for them. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of political power. and they have products that ordinary Americans eat every single day. My brother still eats it every single day. And so they are so entrenched in our society that it's challenging to move. That's why we have to not just accept that and just hope for a better future or just be spun with their marketing that things are okay. We have to deeply examine what is the reality. And you know that they don't want the reality to occur when they post things like ag-gag laws. When I used to be an undercover investigator, as you remember, Colleen, I used to go into these facilities as a worker and document the abuses that go in factory farms and slaughterhouses. They want to pass laws to prevent people from even knowing what's going on in the inside. What does that say? What does that say when they want to feed you, but they want you not to ever know how they did it? That actually reflects what you said earlier, which I agree with. They know that people are compassionate, so they don't want people to really know what's going on in the inside. And so what we have to do, in my opinion, as people who care about animals, I know your listeners care deeply as we do, is that we have a moral obligation not to sit by and hope and pray. It's to wage victorious campaigns that cause transformational change for animals. That's what the legislative campaigns have done. That's where our corporate campaigns have done. One example, we got McDonald's to announce that they're stopped using eggs from caged chickens. That's 2 billion eggs a year. Talk about a massive change with one announcement. Just a few days before this recording, we got Aramark, the largest US-based food service company in the country, to commit that 44% of their offerings by 2025 are going to be vegan. Vegan, not even vegetarian, vegan. That is massive, large-scale institutional change that we owe the animals if we're going to really change the world.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I love the work you are doing and other organizations are doing in disrupting the food industry. And I mean, obviously with your work with Just and co-founding Just and the work you're doing with the food service companies. I mean, there's so many ways to disrupt the food industry and it's super exciting. I think about things like, so I'm a co-founder of the East Bay Animal PAC, as you know, so the Political Action Committee. Here, we recently endorsed Mia Bonta, Rob Bonta's wife, when Rob Bonta was made Attorney General. She stepped in to run for his state assembly seat, and we at the East Bay Animal PAC endorsed her because of her animal-friendly positions, and we believe that she will do a lot and has the potential to do a lot. So, there's lots of ways to get involved politically. I think of things like committees, and I wonder, we'll talk at the end about more what listeners can do to be involved in these kinds of campaigns. But what are your thoughts about that in terms of getting on more of these committees, specifically talking about the legislative process? We talk about the food industry as well, but getting into these positions where we would be able to have an influence over these laws that are passing, as opposed to the industry just being there passing laws that hurt the animals.
I love so much about what you created in the East Bay in California and what you and your team has done out there. I believe so strongly that we can't sit back and just watch politicians do their thing and think somehow they're going to just shape into people who care about animals. They reflect their constituents. They reflect people who are politically active. I have never known politicians on a large scale that ever take on an issue that they were never pushed to take on. They just did it on their own. Did I ever say like, oh, I know no one cares about this, but this is going to be my focus in the legislature? But no one ever says that. No one does that, especially not in the breadth of having many legislators on our side. And so what you're doing, in my opinion, Colleen, is what I think we all should be doing in our communities. Get active locally. Anyone can do it. We all live well, I know you probably have a lot of international listeners. So those in the United States, we all live in communities that are represented by elected officials. We should get to know them. And the surprise is, and I know that you found this out early on, they'll meet with you. They will actually get your thoughts. And they'll ask you, what do you think the priorities should be when I take office? And guess what? You can help rally other people to get involved. And all of a sudden, within your community, you're going to have legislators that push for animals. It's not magic. It's because they're reflecting you, the citizens. And you know what? That trickles out. That trickles out. I just remember President Obama once said, that, if someone can change the room, they can change the town. If you can change the town, you can change the city, you can change the city, you can change the state. That is what we can do. And that is what has been done in California with your organization. That is what any of us can do starting locally. So that's the first thing. What I would say is meet with your local official. I promise you, they will meet with you and form your own version of Colleen's group locally. And I promise you, you're going to raise a ruckus in a good way, and you're going to get animals on the map when they otherwise would not be on the map at all.
Yeah, I mean, and even if you don't start a PAC, but I mean, this is really, when you're talking about local politics, you're talking about campaign contributions to animal-friendly candidates. It does not take very much money. Like, a lot of them don't even take contributions from PACs. So the influence you have is so huge with very little, very few resources, and you as an individual constituent have power. And of course, there's power in numbers. So if you have 4 people show up, that's 4 times more than 1, but it's still, again, not a lot. It doesn't take much for local influence. But what you're saying is also so powerful, is because we forget that the individuals that we influence at the local level, they're ambitious. So what Obama is saying, it's not just because like there's some ephemeral, energy that happens at the city, then the state. That it's literally because those people who were influenced by you and your ideas and your ideas of progress, they take that with them as they progress and as they become ambitious, and they take it to the state, and they take it to potentially the national stage. So we underestimate the power we have as individuals. We think the politicians are the ones making the decisions, and it really disempowers us. It disempowers the animals, and we just completely squander our agency.
So well said. The opposition wants us to not do this. I promise you this. If agribusiness was listening today, and I don't know how many folks from agribusiness listen to your podcast, Colleen, I hope many more do. They might learn some things. But if they were listening, they'd be like, oh my God, please, I hope no one listens to Josh and Colleen. I hope no one ever meets your legislator. I hope everyone feels hopeless about politics. I hope everyone stays home and just complains to their TV that politicians are corrupt and hopeless individuals. That's what the opponents would want us to do. The animals need us to just do basic things locally. And you are so right. I mean, Governor Newsom has been good for animals. I mean, no governor's perfect. Hey, let's just say it. But overall, he has been good for animals. You know what? He didn't start as governor. He started locally in the Bay Area, and he started building supporters that cared a lot about animals. And he carried that with him when he became governor of not just California, it's also the world's 5th largest economy. That did not come out of nowhere. And so I could not agree with you more. Just start local, because you never know, first of all, what your local official could do in the state house or even in the city council, and you never know what they're going to eventually become, because they could become the next congressperson, the next senator, the next governor, and guess what? They'll remember you starting out early on in their career.
That's right. And just to hammer that home even more, if that hasn't been clear, contact your constituents, contact your constituent, contact your representative. Talk to them, tell them what you're interested in, just get their ear. I mean, one of the best moments of my life was when our mayor, Libby Schaaf, at a PAC meeting, because she's been to many of our endorsement meetings, said, how would you have me represent animals publicly? What would you have me say? How would you want me to be their voice? Like, to have her ear at that moment to say, here's how we can do better for animals. And just like, that was powerful. And that was because I show up, we support her campaign, we endorsed her, et cetera. Didn't take much, but the power we have, it's amazing. So don't underestimate that. And yeah, every time you say, oh, agribusiness has all this power, like you said, Josh, I've heard from so many representatives who said, I didn't focus on any particular issue, or I didn't vote yes over here or no over here because based on what you wanted me to, because nobody called me. I didn't know. I didn't hear from anybody. So it just went dead. I mean, I've often said, I don't know what the number is, it's probably just making it up, but let's say even if it's 10, your one letter, your one email, your one phone call basically is like represents 100 or 10 or 50, because they know that you're representing many more people who think the way you do. So just your one call, your one vote has such an impact on an elected official.
Agreed. And You're right that they do listen to you. You know, if you just look at self-motivation, any politician wants to get reelected. That is just inherent. They do. And the best way to get reelected is to be good for your constituents. That's also just basic politics. And so one may be surprised they actually do want to listen to you. They truly do. They want to know what you care about. And that moment that you said about Mayor Libby listening to you, that doesn't have to be just one example. That can be duplicated all across the country. You could produce the same thing Colleen produced, everyone listening, by doing the same thing. And there's going to be a city council member, a mayor, who's going to say, I want to do for animals what you're telling me to do here. I couldn't agree more. It's just a basic form of governance. And the most important role we have in a democracy is citizen. And citizen isn't sitting on the couch and sending angry tweets. Citizen is actually getting involved. Any one of us can do it. I promise you. The first time might be scary. You get over it. You really do.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So, okay, we're going to take our power and well, we already did. Okay. So prop, any of these props, right?
Yeah.
So we did this. So Californians voted. And of course there was opposition, as you said, from the very beginning, right? From all of the industries. But you were talking about the egg industries, but right now what's happening is the pork council, the National Pork Producers Council, is that the right, is that their lobbying name? They fought it at the lower court level. And now here it is, they're challenging this proposition at the Supreme Court, saying that it's unconstitutional. Obviously, they believe that in some way this is unconstitutional. And so that's why it's at the Supreme Court, right? So were they the ones? So I'm just curious where the other industries are, because this was obviously veal, eggs, and pork. So this is the pork specifically council that's fighting this. Tell me more about that.
So Proposition 12 passed with 2/3 of the vote legislative landslide. What happened since we passed these laws all across the country? Regarding eggs, the egg industry has already spent collectively billions of dollars changing to cage-free systems. I'm talking about literally ripping out their cages, tossing them away in giant trash cans, and instead having cage-free systems where, as you and I both know, it's not utopia, not perfect, but at least they're able to run around and they can dust bathe and scratch and perch and lay eggs in a nesting area. Much better for their welfare. So the egg industry spent billions of dollars. So the egg industry is at the point is like, we made these changes. Okay, we don't want to go back. So let's just move forward. Let's just move forward. The veal industry has done something similar. They're like, okay, we get it. Mercy, mercy, please. We'll get rid of our crates. We'll get rid of our crates. So there's been a lot of changes. So what has happened is that there is one industry that, in some extent at least, still wants to try to hold on to a practice from the past. And that is the pork industry, who filed lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit shortly after Proposition 12 passed. 4 different lawsuits to try to overturn the election. And what they're arguing, which is false, by the way, is that California is forcing other states what to do. That's what they would say. And of course, Proposition 12 covers the pork sold within the borders of California. California has every right to regulate sales within its state. Mm-hmm. And for pork, from operations that confine pigs in crates, it's an inhumane product. It's unsafe, at least of public health issues. States have the right to protect its citizens within its borders. So that's why we certainly believe it's constitutional. And by the way, producers outside the state, it's their choice. Hey, if they don't want to comply, they don't have to comply. But if they want to sell to California, they just have to allow pigs to turn around. And by the way, Colleen, this is the part of the story that demonstrates how horrible this industry is that they are fighting everything they have to ensure pigs don't turn around. We're not talking about putting them out on pasture, which would be wonderful. We're talking about an industry who's like, we don't even want these pigs to turn around. Like, that is how callous this industry is towards its animals. You know, for decades in their manuals to pork producers, they would repeat the phrase, treat your pig as if she was a machine. And you know what? If you view pigs as machines, of course you don't care if they can't turn around. In fact, the spokesperson for the National Pork Producers Council that's suing was actually pushed hard by a reporter saying, wait, I don't understand. These pigs can't turn around? Isn't that a problem? The spokesperson quoted saying, whoever asked a pig whether she ever wanted to turn around? That was the response. So this is an industry that cares so little about animals, does not reflect the sentiment of ordinary Americans that animals should be treated humanely. And with that mindset, they're trying to overturn the pork side of the law. Let me be clear here. They're not trying to touch the egg or veal side of the law. So this lawsuit is solely about pork. However, things have changed though. Since 2018, a lot of pork producers though were like, okay, we do see the writing on the wall, and they're getting rid of gestation crates. In fact, now 34% of mother pigs in the pork industry are out of crates for at least a majority of their life. That's up from close to 0% percentage-wise, by the way. So we're moving in a good direction. A lot of pork producers do see the writing on the wall, but it's their trade association that is like, we do not like a precedent about the treatment of animals. We want to still be able to hold on to gestation crates if we want to. It's a mentality like, you will rip out my gestation crate on my cold, dead hand. That's the mentality they have. But I feel we're going to win the case. And overall, I'm fully confident we're going to get rid of gestation crates completely. And this is just a step on the journey.
Yeah. So for those who are unaware, who are listening, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but let's just be clear. So these gestation crates, these are specifically for pigs who are raised. They are the animals who are there to breed the babies who are the ones who are killed. So when we talk about these gestation crates, you know, what is it? 6 months is when a typical pig is killed for
That's right.
meat. But these mothers, these females, they are kept in these crates, and gestation, meaning that that's literally when they're obviously pregnant. Well, there's two different, right? There's the farrowing, and then there's also the gestation. But the gestation crate is where they're there for the majority of the time while they're pregnant, and nursing as well. Is it also during nursing?
It's during their 4-month pregnancy, and then right before they give birth, they're put into a farrowing crate where they give birth and then nurse their young for 3 weeks. And then they go back in the gestation crate, and that cycle goes on for 2 to 3 years.
So does the farrowing crate, is that impacted as well? This is specifically for gestation.
Not in this law. Not
Okay.
in this law.
Okay.
And you're right. That is interesting what you brought up. You talked about the most pigs who are killed, who aren't the mama pigs, they're killed about 6 months. And then the mama pigs are the quote unquote machines that are producing the piglets. The pork industry is just like so much of agribusiness. It's the babies and the moms who are abused the most. You know, chickens in the meat industry are killed at just 45 days. All chicken meat comes from baby chickens. That's a sad reality. How many of us think when we're looking at chicken meat, we're thinking this came from a baby chicken who was genetically manipulated to grow so fast, so obese, that they can be killed at just 45 days in their full size. You know, for egg-laying hens, those are mama birds. They're laying eggs. So it's the mama birds, egg-laying hens. It's the babies, the chickens raised for meat. In the pork industry, it's the babies who are killed for meat. It's the moms confined in gestation crates. For dairy, of course, it's the mama cows who are abused on the dairy line. It's their babies who are ripped away from them. For veal, it's moms and babies, moms and babies, moms and babies. And that is an unfortunate theme within animal agribusiness. And whenever we're working on a law and a corporate campaign, typically what we're trying to do is help the moms and babies abused by agribusiness.
Yeah, it is. I made an infographic many years ago on the fact that we are basically, they are all babies when they're killed though. I mean, right. Aside from the animals who are kept for so long as the breeding animals, and of course, just talking about the reproductive aspects of agribusiness is something that most people don't want to think about. They don't want to talk about it because when we're talking about breeding, you need the boys and you need someone to put the thing in the thing with the girl. Like, I mean, it's a really brutal and ugly side that I know a lot of us don't want to think about. But it's interesting because for those of us who, grew up, when we kind of started our journey not eating animals, often it starts with the ones that are the most like, oh my God, I would never eat veal. And it's so interesting because it's all bad, right? I mean, it's all bad. If we can quantify it, frankly, if we could quantify it, I would have people stop dairy first because of the amount of exploitation and time that female cows are kept and confined and used and exploited and denied their babies, et cetera. I would if we could quantify suffering, which is really hard to do, I would start there. But most of us usually start with what's kind of the most emotional, impactful, and that usually tends to be the veal that we think about. And yet, that's no different than most of the animals who are killed for for meat, specifically for meat. They're babies. They're all babies. The industry isn't going to have the, like, years and years go by when they're losing money. They want to kill them as quickly as possible so they can make money. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what? You're right about how oftentimes we move away from, the animals who kind of touch us more than others, perhaps. Like we're all fans of certain animals. We all are, of course. And, oftentimes, we like, oh my God, I won't touch red meat, that type of thing. Like I care about the pigs and the cows and I get that. Hey, I'm happy that people are thinking about this. That's a great step. It's a step we all took in our lives who made changes. For me, is I think somewhat interesting that I stopped eating fish first because I used to go fishing with my dad. And that was what I used to do. And I loved it because I love my dad. He's a great person. And we used to go on trips together. And it was more being around my dad and being outside on the water than it was about the fish. But that was just the final action of us spending time together. And I felt so bad seeing these fish suffocate to death, because that's what it is. They're suffocating to death. I felt so bad being the cause of it that I became whatever the opposite of a pescatarian is. I eat everything but fish. That's how I started. And so I think you're right. We all kind of start in our own trajectory, and as long as we keep moving forward, I think that's the way to go. And something I feel a lot of hope about is that more people are thinking about this stuff, whether they're starting with dairy, as you suggested, because right now the fluid dairy market is collapsing. A lot of it is because more people are drinking plant-based milk, and that's great. Good for everybody doing that. Also, what I would say is just the reality that animals actually are a moral concern is at the highest point in history too. At the Supreme Court, and I was outside the courthouse during the hearing of the Proposition 12 case. I was listening in, and went 2.5 hours. It was meant to be an hour-long hearing. It went more than double because the case was just so captivating. At no time during the hearing was there any joke, no pig puns, no indication that this wasn't a serious matter. It was considered with such sobriety and concern, no matter what the outcome is, that I'm proud that we collectively as an animal movement has brought our issues to the highest court in the land to be taken as seriously as it comes. And you know what? You said something earlier, Colleen, that agribusiness knows to talk about it in a way so that they don't alienate consumers. The pork industry now knows they can't be public about how they really view the pigs. They know they have to at least say they care about the pigs and that confining them in crates is actually good for them. They cannot talk publicly about these pigs are machines. So even they recognize that the moral concern for animals has never been higher. And we should be so proud what happened a few days ago from this recording in the Supreme Court when the treatment of pigs was discussed in such a serious way with the high court justices in the United States.
I appreciate that so much. And I've been reading a lot of different articles and you're right. I mean, there's been no journalist or news reader who has in any way mocked it. I'm sure, someone does anyway, but I've only heard the most respect for this. And that says a lot about where we are now, where we've come from, and that is testament to advocates like you and organizations like HSUS and other organizations who've been working on these, especially legislative and, corporate campaigns. And absolutely. And you said, all we can do is, move forward. And I think move inward too, because the more we examine what we're comfortable with and making sure that we're making choices that reflect our highest selves and our compassion, I think is so important. And then to know that when we do purchase something, I mean, so many of us care about that. We ask about that all the time, even once we're vegan. Who am I supporting and what are the practices and what are the companies? And, I want to be able to stand by that. We have to be able to put our heads on our pillows at night and know that we made the most compassionate choices. And that's going to come from all different angles. It's going to come from knowing that we're supporting legislative change and we're supporting companies and we're supporting, the products, et cetera. So tell me where we are today with this. When will we hear the verdict? What are your thoughts? You've already said that you feel really good about it. You've got some good people on your side as the plaintiff. So what other what are you hearing? And is it just Josh's optimism no matter what? I know you're going to keep going, but tell us what what your thoughts are about where we're at now.
So we're going to hear their decision likely the end of February, early March. It might go a little bit further down the road next year in terms of late spring, early summer. And overall, I thought it went well. I really do. Not perfect. Typically, no cases to the Supreme Court that involve an issue where there's something related to some controversy is ever going to be perfect in any direction. But we feel good coming out of it. One very smart attorney who used to clerk on the Supreme Court texted me saying, beyond the ethics, but in terms of winning or losing, she wrote, "I'd rather be us than them." And so I feel that, and, I feel that we came out of it strong. I really do. We'll find out. You never know. But here's the problem that the pork industry faces. They face two problems regardless of what even happens in the court. One is that we have successfully made the largest pork buyers in the country. We're talking about companies like McDonald's and Kroger and Burger King and IHOP and Denny's to announce publicly to their shareholders that they are eliminating their purchase of pork from operations that use these confinement devices for perpetuity for these mother pigs. So they can't escape that. Number two, even more importantly, we're never going to stop. We are never going to stop waging these campaigns to get these animals out of cages. And so they might feel good about, oh, we're just going to keep suing and suing and suing. They're facing a movement that will never end to get these animals out of cages. And it is no surprise that we started at nearly no change at all when just a few months of working on this, many decades ago when we started, to such dramatic change as now we're in the Supreme Court. Just imagine where we're going to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I fully believe, and this is not optimistic, Josh, I promise. I know you know me, Colleen. I'm a very optimistic guy. This is not optimistic, Josh. I fully believe forget about my heart, with my mind, that we are going to eliminate the confinement of egg-laying hens virtually 100% by the end of this decade. And we're going to eliminate at least the perpetual confinement of mother pigs in crates by the end of this decade as well. And that will be just a dramatic shift in terms of how we treat animals in our country.
Well, I appreciate that, and I believe you, because I do believe that some of this is a math problem. You look at the numbers, you look at the data, you look at the history, you look at where we are now compared to where we were before, and you look at what they're fighting on and how little they have to stand on. Comparing the food industry, I talk about this a lot in terms of the war that a lot of these industries are fighting in terms of the language and the semantics around what to call products, and trying to stop plant-based companies from being able to use words that they think they own. And to me, that says a lot about they're losing. And they're not fighting on merit. They're fighting on semantics. They're fighting on the things that it's really, if you really believe in what you're doing, you don't stop your fair opponent from doing what they're doing. You just keep trying to win on what you do well. And they're not, because they know the public is moving out, especially when we talk about liquid milk, they're moving out of that direction. So I look at these kinds of fights, and I do look at it as they're losing. And thank goodness for the organizations who are continuing to fight, and the companies who will stand up to these companies. So in all these ways, thank goodness for the people who are standing up to them, but they're losing. And this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. If we think it's going to just kind of turn into a utopia and everything's just going to change, I'd love to believe that's going to happen. That's not realistic, but at least being able to look at where were we 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, where were we then compared to where we are now, both in terms of the public perception of animals, as you mentioned, right? The way that this is framed by journalists and the gatekeepers, that it's at the Supreme Court and it's not a joke, that there are these actual changes that we're seeing legislatively. There's the changes we're seeing in the corporate level. Those are the things we have to remember, to know that we're going to keep moving forward and fighting, but we have to remember where we came from to feel the kind of hope, to feel that optimistic, Josh, that is real. That's real. It's not just mamsy-pamsy. It's real.
It is real. It is completely real. And you're right. Just looking day in and day out, sometimes anyone who cares thinks we're not moving fast enough. And I hope we always think we're not moving fast enough. I get it. I truly do. But it is good to look back. I still remember buying orange juice to put in my cereal in the morning because I couldn't find plant-based milk anywhere.
Totally.
I remember not finding any plant-based cheeses anywhere. I remember the plant-based burgers were just like vegetables grinded up, which some people like and good for them. For someone raised with meat, I thought it was terrible. And that was what it was like for me when I became vegetarian and then eventually vegan. I remember for eggs, it would just be mixing up tofu and then maybe adding some seasoning, and that would be eggs. And my dad and my brother would be like, "What the heck are you eating?" And so to think how far we've come, where every major grocery store in the United States has delicious plant-based meats. Many of them offer plant-based meats in the meat section, just as the plant-based dairies are in the dairy section, appealing to everyone rather than just people like you and me, Colleen. We're looking now at fast food chains now offering plant-based meats. I went to Panda Express. I couldn't believe it, having plant-based orange chicken now that I can get at any Panda Express across the country. I mean, we're talking about absolutely massive changes, not just in the sale of plant-based meats, but every one of the largest meat companies, whether it's Smithfield or Tyson or Cargill or JBS, all of them now offer a line of plant-based meats. All of them do. I feel like a comparison is, there used to be something called the electric car that the auto industry killed decades ago. There's a documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car? All right, now fast forward. Now even General Motors says the future is electric. Every major car company in the world has a division that is focusing on greener cars. Most of it's electric cars. Most in the auto industry globally say, hey, we get the future is this direction, after they fought it for many years. I think this is the same thing is going to happen here. Yes, there are companies, hopefully Eat Just is one of them, and other plant-based companies that you and I are cheering for are going to succeed. All the while, incumbent meat companies are going to start saying, wait a second, we got to focus even more on plant-based. We got to move away from animals, because after all, they claim to be selling protein, not animals. And they can stick with selling protein, just shift a bit more on the plant-based. So I feel like we're winning. I couldn't agree with you more. The laws are changing. The corporate policies are changing. And you know what? The fact that the pork industry has to defend its practices at the highest court of land, they never wanted to do that. I promise you that. I promise you that. Even they acknowledge that they're winning too, that we're winning as well.
Right on, right on, right on. So before we close, then could you share, so I know that obviously at this point it's in the hands of the Supreme Court justices. There's not, we're not going to be able to influence them right now. I will put a plug in for elections matter and voting matters. So we're about to get into the midterms, and please everyone know that your vote matters. It has consequences. Elections have consequences. So you might not be able to write to a Supreme Court justice and tell them what you want right now, but who you vote for, who appoints these justices, it matters. So please make sure you vote. Period, full stop. So that's the first thing I want to say. What are some other things that where people who care about this issue and feel powerless and feel like they can't do anything and they want to, what can individuals who are listening to this do on this issue and other issues that they care about related to animals?
Well, let's start with the politics. Let's get involved politically. Let's meet with your legislator, start a group. Everybody, Colleen started her group. I love Colleen, but as Colleen would say herself, she's not so special, like she's the only one who could ever start a group. Everybody can start a group in their own community. I promise you that others are going to be excited to join you. Oftentimes, they just need someone to start. So what I would say is just start a local group. I don't care if it's 4 people, 4 of your neighbors care about animals. Start a local group and just reach out to legislators and talk to them and meet with them. That's a great place to start. Guess what? voting is important because not only is it good for democracy, and we can make sure that people care about animals, or elected. Also, when they're contacted, they check whether the person who contacted them is actual voter. So if you didn't vote, your voice is not only not heard on election day, your voice is not likely going to be heard when you actually want to follow up with the legislator either. Like, oh, this person even voted. Forget that person. Forget that person. So get involved legislatively. Please do that. What I would say in terms of helping to move the ball on plant-based, so many of us started as like the lone vegan in the household. At least I certainly did. I was raised by a single dad and my brother, and what I tried to do, and I know I could have done a better job, but I have done better in the future, was start to help others eat the way I do by being happy, by being joyful, by bringing them products and not being judgmental, but just saying, hey, I just bought 5 different veggie burgers from the grocery store. Let's just try all 5. You choose whichever one you like the best, and we'll keep buying that. Or let's take them out to the local vegan restaurant. Hey, let's celebrate them as they keep moving forward. You know what? My dad, for 78 years, ate the standard American diet. At 78 years old, he went vegan. So the fact that my dad can do it, who was a baseball coach, who raised 2 boys, the meat-heavy diet, can now eat a plant-based diet, I promise you anyone can, and he's proud of it. And I promise you, you're going to also, with a happy way of doing it, an encompassing, joyful way of bringing people in, offering them foods and tips, send them to Colleen's website so they can learn more about enjoying delicious plant-based foods. You're going to bring more people to eat plant-based, and that's going to trickle out to help even more animals.
Yeah, for sure. Really, we have such an impact. I think we really underestimate. We talk so much about celebrities and how this celebrity went vegan, or we have such an impact on the people in our lives. We have more of an impact.
You're right. Pardon me for interrupting, but I just wanted to agree with you. There's actually studies found that people were asked, like, who influences the most, and there's a big in-depth study on it because they're wondering, like, on Facebook, is it because a celebrity put something out there, a politician? It turned out the people that are listened to the most are the people in your lives. That's who are listened to the most. So it's like, it's not because a celebrity posted something, it's because your next door neighbor did it. It's because your uncle did it. It makes sense. These are the trusted people in our lives. So there are people that trust you. And so everyone who's listening, there's a whole group of people who care about you, who trust you, who want to learn from you and see what you're up to. So throw stuff out there, do it happily, joyfully, and I promise you others, even if they don't say it at first, they're going to start absorbing it, and you'll get them on board.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Josh, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for all you do. And I look forward to having you back on Food for Thought. I was going to ask you, I often end with what brings you hope, but I feel like you've shared that with us. You bring me hope. That is for sure.
Well, listen, thank you for what you do, Colleen. There's so many people around the world who have changed because of listening to you and how you go about it, by bringing people in, by being so welcoming and happy, and in the tone that you set. I know for me, it resonates so much. I'm sure it does with everybody else. So thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to being back, and hopefully we'll be back with a victory at the Supreme Court.
I like that. I like that. Thanks, Josh. Thanks so much.